Today we have Alisa Cohn. Alisa is a former CPA turned executive coach who has worked with founders and executives at Venmo, Etsy, Foursquare, Tory Burch, Mack Weldon, and many more. She is named the #1 startup coach in the world at the 2019 Thinkers 50 Marshall Goldsmith Coaching Awards in London, and one of the top 30 global gurus for startups in 2020. She's the author of From Startup to Grown Up, subtitled Grow Your Leadership to Grow Your Business. Her articles have appeared in Forbes, Inc., and Harvard Business Review. Her work focuses on helping startup founders mature into world-class CEOs. Aside from coaching, she does angel investing and has invested in Broadway shows, which have won 2 Tony Awards. Welcome to the show, Alisa.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I really appreciate that and your kind introduction.
Yep, excited to have you here and talk about all the various things you know. So you have a very impressive resume, but let's start from the beginning. Where did your career begin?
Well, didn't all of our careers begin as children? That's the way I see it. Candidly, my career, the seeds of my career, you could see when I was about 13 years old, and I was part of a peer-led youth group. And it's like, well, I didn't even know what that meant when I was 13. But what I did know is what I was doing was I was facilitating discussions for there are other 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds, in high school. And I didn't know it then, but then I was going to become a facilitator along with the coach, right? So it's like I was always oriented that way. But I would also say that like a very big turning point for me was when I was in the nonprofit world. I worked with international exchange students, and then I worked in a university in New England. And because I was the chief of staff to the provost, we did strategic planning and I got to run that process. And as part of that process, at some point, the provost said, well, you can't manage faculty because they have tenure. And even at the time, I just thought like, it can't be. The people will only do what you want them to do because otherwise you'll fire them. Like that just can't be. So I went off to business school. I went to Cornell to kind of think about that and figure that out. At Cornell, like at many business schools, there's a lot of status and there's a lot of pressure around going into finance. And so I sort of focused on finance and accounting and strategy. I got all turned around and I exited into PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I was on the fast track to partner. Like my life was all set. I was the 5-year track to partner in their special program. And what I always say is that there's this Joseph Campbell quote that I really love, which is, if you can see your path all the way through to the end, you are following someone else's path. Wow. And that was true for me at PwC. I was following someone else's path. I could see it all the way through to the end until I woke up one day, about 2.5 years in, and I thought to myself, I hope I get the flu so I don't have to go to work tomorrow. And 18 hours later, I was rushed to the emergency room by my then boyfriend because I had the flu, and they pumped me through the saline and they were taking me very seriously. And I was down for the count for 2 weeks. And I just thought, no mas, I'd rather be a waitress. Like I got to figure this out. So I had to like look and see. And I definitely had some twists and turns about like how I found, the sort of coaching, but ultimately I found my way to a conference, a body and soul conference, which was not like me. And I was a volunteer, and someone said, okay, so now Cheryl Richardson, a coach, is going to speak to the volunteers. And I thought, oh, do I have to stay for this? Can I leave? But it turned out Cheryl Richardson was amazing and dynamic. And I was like, oh my God, what is that? I want to do that. And that's how I found coaching. And it took me a while to get coach training, and I took a few, detours along the way. But ultimately, I took the coach training, and I was able from that moment to sort of see that's what I want to do, and then to get myself there.
Yeah, that's super interesting in the sense that sometimes like we get to the point where we need to hit, quote unquote, rock bottom, or that turning point where we're finally like, we're fed up. I've had enough. I need to do something different.
Yeah.
And also it's interesting, the unexpected things, how you went to that mind body retreat and that totally shifted, or you saw someone that inspired you to go down a different direction. And I'm curious, like I had heard from a different podcast before you got into coaching, you also had worked at a startup. There was an experience with Goldman Sachs. Could you kind of share that story?
Oh, absolutely. So I was leaving PwC, and by the way, the firm was great to me, and I explained to them that I wasn't feeling it, and they were like, we get it. firms like that understand their alumni base. And so they said, great, we can help you. We can make introductions for you and also just give you some time to kind of explore. So I went off exploring. Now, the problem when you graduate from a fancy business school like Cornell, because I was very interested in helping people maybe solve, I sort of had gained a talent for managing money and just personally managing it and understanding that I had thought it was complicated, but it's not complicated. I gained a real talent and passion for helping people manage their money. And the idea was that they could buy I wanted to make a difference. That was the music in my head. I want to make a difference. And so how can I make a difference? Well, I could help people buy their first home or help people send their kids to school. And I looked into sort of financial planning, but the problem is when you have this really fancy degree from a fancy university, you can't just like go join a financial planning shop. You have to join, in my case, like a Goldman Sachs. And so I got recruited by Goldman Sachs, the creme de la creme, to work in their private, there was like private client services or whatever it was. And, net worth was $5 million minimum net worth. And so I interviewed for that job. They made me the offer. And then I just realized, what am I doing? Like I said, I wanted to make a difference and I'm putting myself back on the same treadmill. In the meantime, I was also interviewing with a startup. And so I ended up taking the job with a startup. And it turned out, as I now know, but didn't quite know then, startups are chaotic. And I was not used to it. It was a super, super early stage, company in Boston. And after 2 weeks, I thought, oh my God, I made such a mistake. So I plucked up my courage and I called the guy from Goldman back. And I said, remember me from, just a few weeks ago. I joined the startup. It was obviously a mistake. And actually, I'd love to come to work for Goldman Sachs. And he said, no, that was it. You had your chance. And the offer doesn't stand anymore. And of course, I was crushed and upset. But he gave me actually 2 gifts. He said to me, listen, you're going to go off and you're going to live your life. And you have 2 superpowers. The first is I really, it's like you have a superpower of being really confident. You come across as very confident. And I really believe what you say. So that's going to serve you in good stead. And the second is I did not offer you that job because of your past experience or because business school or anything. I offered you that job because of your experience in stand-up comedy, which I had done many years prior. I, done like a year of stand-up comedy in Boston. And I just know that anyone who can do stand-up comedy knows what it's like to be rejected and continue moving. So kind of like goodbye and good luck.
Yeah.
So I was totally I was happy he told me that. I wrote it down in a little journal. Like, you have a superpower, I wrote, and I quoted him. And I went back to the startup, tail between my legs, kind of emotionally. I hadn't told them I was planning to leave. And then it turned out to be such a great experience. And so I ended up being the 3rd employee in and the head of strategy at that company. And then in the future, I was a CFO and then ultimately GM of a second startup. And that turned out to be super important to me because, first of all, I gained a love of startups. Like, I got used to the chaos. I enjoyed the chaos. I enjoyed creating order and driving a process inside of a chaotic environment, and also just kind of the fun and the enjoyment of everyone's like pulling together and having meaning. And then I also just got a lot of leadership experience at a young age, which you can't really get outside of startups. And of course, it was sowed the seeds for my expertise in startups now.
Right. And I think the thing is, when you work in a startup, I mean, everybody's required to pretty much wear multiple hats. And I think that's also the cool thing. You get to be the responsible party in terms of a lot of things that, at large organizations, you probably aren't responsible for, right? Or don't get the opportunity to take the ownership. So I think that's something very unique. Also about just the adjustment, right? You went from PwC, where things are probably very structured, a lot of processes. I mean, it's a giant. And then you go into a startup. So for anyone thinking about making that type of transition, that's something to be aware of, is there is going to be an adjustment period because you're playing an entirely different environment. One thing I thought was very interesting was, okay, the improv skill kind of seems like, okay, that came from left field, right? And so I'm curious, like, what are some other possible overlooked skills that does connect to, people's careers or advancement that they may not consider?
Oh, yeah. Great question. I think like every skill, especially skills that are kind of off the beaten path. So the truth is that when you go to any training program or university or business school, you're gaining the same skills as everybody else. You understand how to do marketing, you understand how to do finance. Um, Everybody has to learn, sort of people skills. And the way to think about that is to throw yourself in environments where you aren't necessarily like everybody, or where you're not the leader, or where you're playing, sort of a role that makes you uncomfortable. So the thing about stand-up comedy is that, and by the way, it was not improv. I did later in my life take here in New York, take a little class and did a performance
Hmm.
in beatbox, hip hop, freestyle, rap.
Love that.
But that was later in life. This was stand-up comedy, and the reason that's different is because there are very different skills between improv and stand-up comedy. You have to really think about the structure of a joke when you're writing for stand-up comedy. You have to think about these different rules. Thinking about timing is so important. And I just think that, like, if you are somebody, for example, going into, if you're somebody who's comfortable in a structured environment, and if you're somebody who's really comfortable with, let's say, being at your computer and doing spreadsheets, a great thing to do is to throw yourself either with a volunteer organization or to get a job like this is sales. And that's going to teach you people skills. And that's going to teach you the ability to get rejected, to have something not work. And that's going to teach you how to tell a story. So in addition, just back to storytelling, people might minimize the role of storytelling in everything you do. I have come to realize how important the role of storytelling is, and building your skills in storytelling is kind of like off the beaten path. But again, how do you do that? Well, you do a lot of public speaking. You find something you're passionate about, and you do fundraising for that organization. Oh, fundraising, no one wants to do that. But when you sort of when you push yourself to do things that make you uncomfortable, which is, sort of my religion, then you're able to build a whole set of skills when you don't even know when they're going to come in handy. I had no idea that the guy from Goldman Sachs was going to say to me, "Oh, it's because you're a stand-up comic. That's why I wanted to hire you."
Yeah. It's so interesting that to take skills or start to take on skills that are out of your normal range, right? That starts to build new connections that, you never know when they come up.
Right. Exactly.
And so one thing that I wanted to ask was you went from working at PwC to startups to coaching, et cetera. And so with that, how did you reinvent yourself along the path as you changed careers?
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I started in the nonprofit world. So I was in the nonprofit world. I was a strategy consultant. I went from business school. I was at, PwC. So I did a whole bunch of things there, and then in the startup world, and then a coach. So it has been, and I felt like it was almost like a 2-year stint and everything until I became a coach. And I think, so first of all, the first step for me was always just like feeling really uncomfortable and like a fraud, like, oh, I can't believe they hired me to do this thing. And feeling kind of young and little inside and insecure. And so there was something I sort of just realized was a signal for me that, you have to make some changes here. And then I think the next step was to get it in my mind's eye that I was going to figure out how to do this. And then what I do really well is I look for role models around me who are doing something really well. And then I watch them and I begin to build into my repertoire the skills that that they would kind of embody. So for example, in the startup world, I mean, going from PwC to the startup world was indeed a massive change, both in the structure of the environment, the sort of the size of the company, figure out what you had to do. And there was one guy who was a consultant. He was the CTO, Charlie. I remember Charlie. And Charlie was the kind of guy who'd been in the startup world for a long time. So he was almost like a senior executive and a structured person inside of this, sort of chaotic world. So I watched the way he would handle things one after another. I watched the way he would kind of approach things with confidence. I watched the way he would slow everybody down and say, okay, so what are we really talking about here? Let's do one thing at a time. And I began to adopt those skills in order to find a way to structure myself. And so I think, that you sort of learn from watching, and then you learn from doing. But I think there's also, for everything, an important mental state that you kind of begin to put yourself in the shoes of like, no, I'm really doing this. Like, even in the startup world, I joined the startup world, good enough, fine. And then the next role I had, I actually got hired to be the GM of the Boston office in my second startup. And the CEO came to Boston just to meet me and just to kind of like rubber stamp my, what I was going to do. And he saw, like I always say, like in the bottom left-hand corner of my resume, he saw that I was a CPA. And he said to me, "You're a CPA." I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you want to be CFO?" I said, "No, I really don't." He said, "Listen, I have a rent a CFO. She's robbing us blind because she's so expensive. I need you to go to California, be the CFO, fix our processes. You can hire your replacement, and then you can come back to Boston." So I said, "Okay." So there I was, marching off to California, reporting for duty as a CFO. And I felt like a kid. Like, I can't believe, the part of the reason I couldn't, actually stay as CPA is I really couldn't divide by anything in my head except for 10, and I just felt like, oh, this is not me. But turned out that I kind of owned the role, and I said to myself, well, what would a CFO do? I talked to a lot of my friends and colleagues from PwC, and I put a lot of structure in place. And I just kind of put one foot in front of the other, figuring out what is the next right action. Well, in my head, I kept thinking, you're the CFO now. You're the CFO now. So there's something there around the mental state that's very helpful, as well as drawing on, sort of advice and role modelship from other people.
Yeah, I think that combination of, okay, first looking at role models, I mean, that's one of the best ways to learn is just modeling somebody who already is successful or doing well what you want to do. And
Yeah.
it's interesting that you went to then get feedback from others. And even the question of what would a CFO do? I think that's an important question, right? You could replace CFO with X. But that's an important way of tackling, I guess, that problem and starting to instill those type of beliefs in yourself.
Yeah. And then you gain confidence because you do the things and people respond to you like as if you're the CFO. I'd go to meetings, on behalf of the company, and they like related to me like I was a CFO. So that was also very helpful. And then also you make mistakes because you make plenty of mistakes, and then you kind of fix them. And then you realize, oh, if I make a mistake, it's not so fatal. So there's a lot of ways that you can build that confidence in anything you're doing. I mean, certainly when I became a coach, that was a massive transformation. And by the way, speaking of identity, when I was at PwC, I was doing this consulting engagement for some company in the area I was in New England and in Boston. And weirdly, I ran into a high school classmate, Sherry Oulette. And she's like, "Wow, you're at PwC?" I was like, "Yeah, wow." She was in this company. Yeah. Can you believe this? I saw an email she had written to another classmate of ours saying, "I just saw Alisa Cohn. She's at PwC. Can you believe it?" And I thought, oh God, jeez. I have to get out of here. Yeah. This is not me. Right. And so like, that was like such a gift from, it's harsh, but it was a gift from the universe because I was not happy talking about what I was doing. And PwC is a great firm, but like being a CPA, being a strategy consultant just was not my thing. So when I became a coach, I was so proud to say, I'm a coach. I was so proud, like that is who I am. At the same time, when I was a young coach, I would say it very not confidently. So people say, what do you do? And I'd say, I'm a coach. So I have to really begin to own you are a coach and do the things that coaches do and begin to really, declare that because identity is such an important part of it.
Yeah. Something I want to highlight too, that I noticed with what you're just explaining there, even the story of going from Boston over to California is you're kind of just open to following the path of where life has taken you, right? In the sense that when an opportunity opens up, you didn't shy away from, okay, let's go explore that path. Let's explore this path. And also looking at the signals, even like you said, that email, right? That was almost like a signal saying, okay, you know what? It's time for me to get out of here. And I think it's important to pay attention to things like that. So
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I would also just say the big signal being like, I hope I get the flu so I don't have to go to work tomorrow. That was a
yeah,
pretty big signal. And then actually
yeah,
getting the flu. Yeah. So
exactly.
I think I've learned more and more to listen to those signals. And also to your point about being open, the truth is you can't be open to everything, but you can be open to more. And I tell my clients this all the time, like you can be open to more things than you think you can. And a good
Hmm.
thought exercise for everybody is, well, what if you could? I'm not saying you're gonna. No, no, no,
Hmm.
no. I know you're gonna stay exactly where you are and do exactly what you are, not a problem. But what if you were looking for another job? I once said to somebody, or well, what if you were going to pursue that promotion? Or well, what if you could raise money?
Hmm.
And it's like very helpful for people to, in a safe space, just begin to try on the idea of openness because things emerge that you don't expect.
I love that question. I mean, I think that just starts to really open up the possibilities. So yeah, I really like that. Next, let's dive deeper into like what you're already touched on was just, I guess we could call it imposter syndrome or tools to overcome it when someone doesn't feel totally confident that they are who they are and they really are, as good as they are, right? How can someone overcome that?
I know it's very difficult topic for people because also people feel very like ashamed of their imposter syndrome because their imposter is a sort of it's a point of shame,
Hmm.
and people don't therefore talk about it very much, and they don't realize how many people experience imposter syndrome. In fact, research shows that 95% of high achievers, if you can believe that, 95% of high achievers feel imposter syndrome. And famous imposters are Howard Schultz, Lady Gaga, Michael Jordan. So you're in good company, right? If
Yep.
you're feeling the imposter syndrome. And so first of all, you have to kind of acknowledge to yourself, like I'm feeling this way, and you have to come to terms with your inner critic. So one tool I suggest everybody do is when they're feeling their imposter or feeling their incredible self-doubt and self-criticism, to really name it, to tune
Mm.
into the voices and be specific about what they are telling themselves, and even write it down if you can, because just the fact of like tuning in and really getting specific helps you unhook yourself. It gives you a little bit of space
Mhm.
between you and the imposter. So for example, one of my clients, he was a great sales guy from the point of view of like he was great at raising money and he was great at leading the team, and for whatever reason he could not hire senior talent. And it was it was like strange and quite noticeable that he just kind of never was able to close the deal with senior talent. He would always give me these, excuses like, oh, that person wasn't really good enough, or oh, that person wanted too much money. And time went by and he really couldn't land senior talent. So I once overheard him on this call, and I heard a very different person on that call. He was like tentative, he was uncomfortable, he was kind of like fumfering. And I said, your affect is very different when you're on these calls with people you're trying to close. What's going on? And he
Mhm.
tuned in and he said to himself and to me, I feel like I'm going to pull them away from their safe job to join our startup. And what if they fail? What if we fail? And he realized that he was bringing this what if we fail imposter to every experience that he was doing. So no wonder they weren't joining,
Right.
right? The senior people weren't
Yep.
joining because he was bringing this like what if we fail vibe. So he was able to turn that around once he gave himself some distance from it by really articulating and tuning into what it was.
Yeah, and I think a key takeaway there is naming that, right? Realizing
Yes.
that that is not you. I've heard other exercises where the same thing with different emotions you might be feeling, give it a name, etc. And I think that really starts to, like you said, create that distance and separation.
Yeah, definitely. And one other tool, just to share this with you, is I have my clients put together a highlight reel. And
Hmm.
so a highlight reel is your best of moments, right? Times you overcame challenges, times you were really excellent, where you achieved something significant. And when you write, I'm into writing them down, right? When you write those down, like literally write them down, you begin to create a new story for yourself and a new
Right.
repertoire. And I had one of my clients, he was a young partner in a VC firm, and he just felt like, oh, no one's talking to me. I don't know if I'm doing a good job. And the thing about VC is that it's very challenging because you don't even know if you're a good investor for 7 years or 10 years. So
Hmm.
you're just toiling away in obscurity, thinking they were going to pull the hook on him. And I asked him to put together a highlight reel. And so he thought that was like stupid, which I can understand, touchy feely, right? And so I said, please do this for me. So he wrote down his successes, a whole number of them. And about a week and a half later, we talked again, and he was completely energized because he had written down his successes. They reminded him of more successes, and that gave him more confidence. He read his highlight reel every single day, and that gave him more confidence. And then he would tackle the most difficult things in his day first because he was like bursting and brimming from that confidence. And that helped him gain even more confidence over his day. So, the highlight reel can help you get perspective, but can also actually change your experience of yourself and kind of brighten you up in a moment. And that helps you achieve more.
Yeah, that is so cool. I've never heard of that idea, but it makes so much sense. I think going back to the imposter syndrome, or people, most of the time, high achievers are very hard on themselves and they're focusing on the negatives. Oh, that's where this went wrong, etc. But yeah, how often do we sit down and really look at all the awesome things I've done? That's really powerful. I want to ask as well, in terms of someone achieving greater self awareness, what are some questions or tools or anything you do for someone to be more introspective and better understand themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, the classic way to get a look in the mirror is to do a 360 feedback process. So,
Hmm.
360 is the degrees of a circle. And so, with that, the metaphor there is that you ask folks all around you, what are my strengths? What are my development opportunities? And what suggestions do you have for me? And so, people don't always feel comfortable asking their colleagues that. Also, their colleagues may not answer, right? Certainly, bosses don't feel so comfortable asking employees, and employees don't feel comfortable saying directly to the boss, well, you're kind of overly emotional and stress all of us out at times. So that's where a coach is very helpful, right? That a coach can come in and ask the people all around you about your strengths and development opportunities. But if you don't have a coach, you can actually do what I call the 3 words exercise. You can ask folks around you by email or in person, whatever it is. You can always say, everyone listening to this can always say, hey, I heard a coach say this activity. Blame me. Okay.
Hmm.
I heard a coach one time suggest that I ask folks, what are the 3 words that come to mind when you think about me? And so they can do that by email, or they can do that, in person. If they want to think about it for a second, that's okay. But when you think about me, what are the 3 words that come to mind when you think about me? And people will give you a whole bunch of words. And you think they're going to be nice, but because you're asking for something very kind of almost like easy, they won't necessarily be nice, and you will get really honest feedback about yourself. Not only that, but even if they are being, let's say, nice, I had a client one time who told me, that she's very strategic. And I said, well, that's really interesting. Did people around you think that? Oh, I'm sure they think that. So she asked them, like because I suggested she do it, what are the 3 words you think about when you think about me? And what they said was thoughtful, critical, and maybe I think it was like methodical or detail oriented, thoughtful, critical, and detail oriented, which is great, sort of. And also not strategic. Like not a single person says strategic, right? So, like that or don't like that. And you can make a meaning out of that however you want, but nobody is thinking strategic when she comes to mind. So why not? And for all of us, we have to think about what is our behavior saying to other people that helps them identify kind of who we are and what we're about. And the last tool I would suggest to everybody, just to ignite your own self-awareness, is to kind of journal yourself. So the things I just talked about are the awareness that your awareness of your impact on others, because you are the expert on your intention, but everybody around you is the expert on your impact. So part of development as a professional and a leader is to marry your intention with your impact. So that's important. And then equally, right, you want to kind of ignite your own self-awareness. So it's helpful to write yourself some journal prompts throughout the day. What energized me the most today? What de-energized me the most today? What kinds of things do I shy away from doing? What kinds of things do I lean into? And when you write that kind of stuff down, it kind of begins to give you a sense of yourself and your rhythms and your natural swing and the things that are difficult for you. And that can also help fill in the puzzle about and kind of explain to yourself why you're doing what you're doing and how you need to maybe adjust to be more effective.
Yeah. I think that's so many powerful exercises there. And especially with the journaling aspect, I mean, taking that moment to pause and just reflect. And like you said, to understand why do you do the things you do? And also understanding your own rhythm. How do you get into flow? Why am I feeling low energy? Or why did I have an amazing day? Right? Deconstructing that for yourself. And so,
Yeah.
Alyssa, I wanted to ask you, what's been the most important skill you've learned and why?
The most important skill I have learned is emotional regulation, emotional
Mm,
self regulation. I think that I'm a very emotional person. And also, that's back to self awareness. I'm not always aware of what's triggering me. It just feels
hmm.
like the most natural thing to do is to, you know, like react to something.
Right.
And as I've come to terms with my own, sort of my own triggers where I get kind of caught off guard, where I have an Achilles heel, and I'm able to pause and take a breath and choose a response rather than have a reaction, the more successful I am. So I think that also helps because I want to give a shout out to the second skill, which is having having conversations which are direct and hopefully diplomatic. And
Hmm.
I think, again, emotional self regulation allows you to then go approach difficult conversations without making them confrontations.
Hmm.
And I do know for a fact that your life and your professional life is as successful and your personal life is as successful as the number of uncomfortable conversations you are willing to have.
So true. And like you said, I mean, those two are greatly linked together, right? When it comes to emotional regulation, I wanted to ask, it's one thing to know what to do versus when you're in the situation, sometimes you're like, I know this, I know I shouldn't react. And then, how have you been able to kind of overcome knowing what to do versus being able to actually do it in the heat of the moment?
Yeah. First of all, it's screwing it up in the heat of the moment many, many times. That's step one. And then I think, I am uniquely enjoy or focused on self development for whatever reason.
Hmm.
I think I was born that way. I probably had a certain makeup as a child, and experiences happened to me so that I am very interested in personal development, in getting better and improving. So when I see this flaw in myself and this problem in myself that I can kind of overreact and very quick to react and I can have a quick temper at times, then I realize that I need to do better. And then I would say I've added to that maybe skills, experiences in training and meditation a little bit, in learning about Buddhism and learning about, more emotional, let's say, I think it's called equilibrium, and feeling like you can be at an equilibrium. And then the other thing I would say is that I saw that it was just like hard in my personal life. The people around
Hmm.
me, didn't like it when I would fly off the handle or even maybe just get sort of sulky or get defensive or kind of however I was acting out. And I will say that in my professional life, that's just obviously not an option. And also,
Hmm.
I don't get triggered in my professional life in the same way I get triggered in my personal life. So
Right.
I learned how to have this emotional regulation professionally very much. And then I could translate that. Like, what would it be like if I were in a professional environment right now? And I began to translate that into my personal life. So my boyfriend appreciates that for sure. Like just last night, I got a little snippy with him. And then I was able to articulate, first of all, I'm sorry I'm getting snippy with you. And second of all, I'm just really hungry. And so I just need to really eat something. And then we need to have this conversation.
Yeah.
And that can be very simple and disarming. And also, by the way, it's probably true for all of us, right? There's something bodily going on that you need to
Yep.
handle. And sometimes that's what's setting you off. But also, if you're aware of your own triggers, you're able to then handle and deal with your own triggers.
Right. And like what you said, sometimes I'm just hungry, right? Like how often has that happened? I had a conversation with my wife where we now have a rule where if we have something important to talk about, we make sure we eat dinner first and have the conversation after that. Otherwise, when we're trying to
Yes,
talk before, being fed, I mean, it just usually doesn't go in a great direction. So, yeah, simple
totally.
stuff like that is interesting. Next is, what do you do now to continue developing your skills? You're obviously very far along your career. You've had many great achievements. How does somebody who's already at a very high level, how do you continue developing your skills? What are things you're currently doing?
Oh, I do all the things. I read books that, that point me in the direction of things I want to learn. I listen to podcasts, and that also helped me, sort of think something different. I would say, Michael, there, in terms of reading books, listening to podcasts, I both read in my field or in areas that are interesting to me, like maybe psychology, why people do what they do. And I also read and listen to adjacent, because I think it's important to connect the dots between fields or, sort of knowledge bases that are not like yours, because that gives you a fresh perspective. And if you're a thinking person, which I am, you can find ways to make the leap from maybe a natural law, like, sort of something in the natural environment, and bring it into your own work. And I think it makes you a better professional.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I can't tell you how many times I look at what happens in nature, whether it's animals, plants, etc. How does nature naturally unfold, or what are different patterns, right? Even of, high tides and low tides with water, right? There's going to be ups and downs, and you see those type of parallels in professional life and other areas. So, yeah, I totally understand that. That's great. Next, I've heard you talk about being a situational leader to be able to better handle different behaviors, styles. So for those that are out there listening that are leaders or in a position overseeing other people, how does someone become a better situational leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm very, very focused on situational leadership in the broad sense, because the truth is that something that might work for you in a certain environment may not work for you in a different environment. And if you think about it, I've been in tons of environments. I've been in the nonprofit world. I've been in, corporate America. I've been in the consulting world. I've been in startups. Now I'm a solopreneur. So I know for a fact that the environment you're in matters. And when I work with founders, they have to grow so fast and things move so quickly around them. The playbook they used a month ago is not necessarily going to work now. So it's very important for anyone to assess kind of what's needed here now. That's what's so important. Not like, I think people have these like recipes for leadership, like a leader always leads from the front, or a leader always leads from behind. Not true.
Yeah.
Sometimes a leader needs to lead from the front, as in, here's where we're going, here's what we need to do, and I need you to do this. And sometimes a leader needs to lead from behind, which is moving folks along, encouraging them, asking good questions, letting them get the credit and them take the lead, bringing consensus together. And I think it's so important for every leader, and certainly for myself, to assess what's going on here and what is needed from me. And I would add that if you're a CEO or an executive or anyone dealing with a bunch of people as a manager or as a peer, you have to recognize that you're dealing with that group as a group. And there's one thing that's required from you as a group, but every single person is different. They have different motivations. They have different ways of needing to hear it. Maybe somebody needs to be told a story and understand the vision and big picture where we're going. Somebody just needs the next step and is going to get confused by that story. Somebody needs to understand the data and why the data is pointing in a certain direction. And you, as an influential professional or as a leader or a manager, need to kind of figure out what that person in front of you right now needs from you, and then be able to pull the right tool and adapt yourself to that person. And that is like the promise and the best part of situational leadership.
Right. And staying adaptable, right? I think what you're highlighting there is staying adaptable, flexible, realizing what is needed in that moment and not having a very fixed mindset as a leader. I think that's very important.
Yeah, adaptability is such an important skill for sure.
Yeah. You've worked with so many founders, leaders, and also people that have grown from startup to CEO to et cetera. And so I'm curious, do you notice any patterns with the coaching clients you've worked with at different stages, or certain hurdles that most leaders need to overcome, or different milestones that you think are common that
Yeah,
someone may encounter?
definitely. I think that, you know, leaders and certainly CEOs, certainly founders and many CEOs don't realize how much their words have weight, that their suggestions are orders, that their inklings are orders, that their brainstorming are orders. And of course, their orders are orders. And CEOs don't realize that that is how they come across. So that is one thing that I would say all leaders and all CEOs always could use some, more coaching and guidance on, because they're just in their head. They know what it's like to be them. They don't know what it's like to be with them. They're like, I'm so nice, right? But it doesn't work that way, because you're the boss, right? But then counter to that, right? It sounds like a second, a different thought, but it's the same thought, is that you as a leader have to repeat yourself over and over again. And the people don't realize how much they have to repeat themselves, because people didn't hear your message, because you communicated in a broad group and they need to hear it one-on-one, because you evolved your thinking ever so slightly and you didn't tie it all up together. So you've got to communicate you've got to communicate your vision over and over and over again, or communicate what you want them to know over and over again. Because the thing is, they're doing their day-to-day jobs and they're not thinking about you or even the bigger picture. They're just trying to get their day-to-day jobs done. And so they forget. They, like you, do what's easy to do, what they enjoy doing. They stay with people they don't like. And so you need to communicate over and over where we're going as a leader, as a CEO, because that's the only way people are going to keep remembering and marching in the same direction.
That's awesome. Next is, let's talk about meetings. I know I've heard you on different podcasts, and this is something you're very passionate about. So
meetings.
Let me just cue it up with, what are the keys to having effective meetings?
Oh, thank you for asking. My favorite topic. I love meetings. I love the potential for meetings, right? You got everybody in the room, all the decision makers, you got smart people, and here we finally can get together and we can talk it out. And so what gets in the way? I think lack of planning gets in the way. You're like, we're going to have this meeting, sit in the room, let's have the meeting. So, okay, we're having the meeting, right? But like, wait a minute, what's the meeting about?
Yeah.
So number one, what's the goal of the meeting? And what I say to anybody, what's the goal of this meeting? They always, I won't say always, but like 99% of the time, recite to me the agenda of the meeting. Well, first we're going to talk about this, then we're going to talk about this, then we're going to talk about that. No. What's the goal? It's always a verb: to communicate, to describe, to get on the same page, to make a decision, whatever that is, or to decide. So that's one of my favorites, because they'll say, okay, we're going to decide this massive strategic direction. Okay, great. Good luck with that. What's the agenda? How are you going to get there? The agenda is the way you're going to get there. And they say, well, we're going to present all the information. We're going to talk it out. And after an hour, we're going to decide. So I was like, okay, right? Do you really think it's going to take only an hour to decide this like massive strategic direction? And they would say, no, I guess not. Okay, that is awesome. That's honest, right? So is the goal really to decide, or is the goal to get all the information on the table to then set us up to decide? That. Okay, amazing. So now we're set up to actually have a good meeting. I love pre-work, right? So what's the pre-work you want to bring to prime people's minds and get them thinking, and also maybe do a little bit of the work before the meeting. And they come into the meeting and they have the meeting, and it's going to go hopefully better. Hopefully you invite the right people to the meeting. Hopefully you don't invite everybody and their uncle. You just invite the right people, which is difficult to do because everyone wants to be at the important meetings, but okay. So then at the end of the meeting, my 3 questions to end the meeting, everyone should write these down. What did we decide here? And if you in a meeting actually ask people what we decided here, I promise you're going to get different names, right? Different expressions of what we decided here. So what did we decide here? Who else needs to know? And who will do what by when? And if you can land that in the meeting, you probably have a good alignment of what you just accomplished in that meeting, and you set the table for actually having a follow-up meeting, which then drives action, because ultimately meetings are about getting mutual understanding and driving action.
Right. And I think something you touched on there that's super important is, one, coming in with a goal, and second, walking out making sure we're all on the same page and we're aligned. Because with a lot of different people at a meeting, we all heard different things or think, okay, the plan might be this or that. So I love, kind of having that wrap up. A question I have for you is, so when it comes to meetings, let's say there's a weekly, let's just say it's a marketing meeting. Let's say every Monday at this time, we're doing this marketing meeting. What do you do in situations where, let's say this week there's not as much to talk about, et cetera? Do you skip the meeting or do you keep it to just keep the cadence and rhythm going? How do you, because I think that happens often with a lot of different departments, right? Maybe they have a cadence, but maybe this week there isn't as much. How would you go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I once worked with an executive team and I said, "How often do you meet?" And they said, "We meet on every Tuesday." I said, "Great. What's the goal of that meeting?" And every single person in the room were like,
Hmm.
fumfer, fumfer, fumfer. And I said, "It sounds like you have the meeting. You sounds like you have the Tuesday executive meeting because it's Tuesday." Right? And they're like, "Yeah, kind of." So that's not good. I do not encourage that. I do encourage your executive team to meet, but I do not encourage you to not have a goal of the meeting. The goal of the meeting for the executive team should always be to sync up. So, what's the goal of the marketing meeting? So, the marketing meeting might be to sync up, to understand what everyone's doing. And if you got nothing to talk about because you already, for some reason, there was no action that got changed from last week, I guess, in the marketing group, then you might decide that it's a good moment to select a strategic topic and a deeper topic to kick around as a team, to get some new thinking, to inspire new thinking, to catalyze new ideas, to teach something to ourselves in some ways. So I wouldn't keep the meeting because because you want to have a cadence. I would keep the meeting because there's always something to talk about that we never have time for. And if you don't have anything to talk about, that is what you should talk about in the meeting.
Great idea. Thank you for that. Let's talk about remote teams. I think obviously over the past few years, ton of companies have started being remote. And I think one of the issues with that is it can start to become a little bit isolating, or for certain people, it's an adjustment. So, any advice around how to effectively manage a remote team?
Yeah. Just to say, it is very challenging. Let's just be honest about it. Working remotely is challenging for everybody. I know it feels comfortable because you get to not commute and you get to be home and do things at home. So that's comfortable from that point of view. But the discomfort is that you don't really know can't get the vibe and the mood from somebody. You don't really know what's going on with them. You don't get to have the informal conversations, which actually the glue of culture and rapport in a workplace. Um, and it's just hard to really get a sense of where everybody's at. However, we are in remote work. We're in a time of remote work, and we've probably been in a time of remote work for a long time. So it's important, first of all, as a manager, to pull your remote team together and just talk about, hey, we're remote. So what that means is we have flexibility in a lot of great ways, and that's great. And what that also means is that we have to be more rigorous in building a remote team culture for ourselves and for each other. It also means that I have to over communicate with you what's going on and when we change direction and maybe, things that are happening. So you understand the context of the company and you understand what's on my mind. And I'm going to ask you to be proactive in over communicating to me things like your whereabouts. If you'll be unavailable for certain periods of time, it's totally fine if you are, but let me know. So I'm not expecting something. Also, I'm going to ask you to over communicate the status of your work, kind of where you're at with certain things so that we don't so we don't have any gaps in communication and we have a free form of conversation and a free form of updates back and forth. One way to do that is simply using a Google Doc or something where you have a shared document where you can just sort of discuss and leave comments for each other. That certainly you can have a regular one-on-one. And I think it's even more important for that regular one-on-one to be focused on the topics that are not being covered in the status update. The status update you can do in the shared document. This is more like, how are you doing? What obstacles are you finding? We on the same page about direction? Are we on the same page about what the most important thing you're working on is? How are you having impact in the team? Are there concerns? Anyone you're having trouble working with? That is like the way to do a one-on-one. It's particularly important when you're remote.
Yeah. And with remote teams, I think one of the effective tools is having one of those offsites or an annual company retreat, et cetera. What are some of the ways to make that experience of an offsite effective?
Yeah, I love that. So the thing about remote teams is that, and researchers prove this for years, that the way to make sure remote teams are effective is to get people together in person at least once a year. That if you can have an interaction, it can really last you a long time. And it
Hmm.
helps cover over some of the issues that happen with remote teams. One thing about remote teams is that people use email and text and Slack and whatnot to communicate, and you can easily be misread over Slack, and you can decide you don't like somebody over email. But then when you have a drink with them, you hang out with them, that is like a great way to just get to know them, which then cushions all the future email communication you get from them. So step one of having an offsite, a team offsite, is to have the offsite. Just get people together in person, have them connect, leave time for social activities and for making sure that people have time to sort of socialize together. The second thing is, just like we talked about with meetings, having a goal for the offsite. It might certainly be to connect. It might also be to align on our vision for the year. It might be to talk about the way we work together and brainstorm better ways to work together. It could be to get to know our working styles better. It could be to get together and work through the product roadmap, right? It could be like the content can be anything. And then you design your agenda to make sure that you have both the working sessions. People work together better when they practice working together. So those working together sections are part of the offsite and part of the socialization. And then, as I said, making sure that you have time to have the social interaction, having extended breaks, lunch hours, structured. One of my clients did a scavenger hunt. One of my clients did like an Iron Chef situation where you have things which are fun and also working together. And that helps you build those bonds and bridges, which really matter in remote work.
Is there a certain, and I know the answer is it depends, but is there any recommendation around the duration? Would you recommend it's like a 2-nighter, a 3-nighter? How would someone think about duration?
Yeah. So I like that you even said nighters, because what you said was like staying over. And staying over is very helpful because it gets you out of your environment. Now, if you've got home situations that you have to manage for yourself, which having kids or other people you're taking care of, or a situation, you might need help from your manager, and the manager should be open to helping you navigate what you need to do to handle childcare or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, getting people in a hotel, right, in a sort of a location where they can all hang out together and be very, intentional about having socialization together, then I think that's important. So I would say at least one night, maybe 2 nights if you can get away with it and if you're willing to invest the time. Sometimes companies do it for a week. It's only once a year.
And in terms of facilitating and building a great team, my question is, what are the best ways to identify and recruit talented people to join your team?
Yeah, I love that. So like with everything, it starts with you doing the work to decide what does amazing look like. So first of all, what role are we trying to hire for? And if this person were operating at a 10 out of 10, what would I assume and want this person to be doing? And like going to the trouble of really articulating that helps you then model a job description and know what you're looking for. Then when you start interviewing people, you want to collect evidence. What I think people fall into this trap is that they fall in love with the resume. Like, oh, they went to this good school. Oh, they worked at LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever they worked, or Google. And you feel like, oh, they must have done a great job. Well, not really. You don't really know. Like if they did if they took credit for created the product roadmap at LinkedIn, you think they can create your product roadmap? Well, did they do it themselves, or were they in the room when it was happening? Or did they do it with their talented team around them, or were they the ones really driving it? I don't know. So the way to figure that out is to gather evidence. And the way to gather evidence is to ask, so when you built the product roadmap, tell me specifically the steps you went through to build it and how to think about it. What went wrong that you weren't expecting when that all happened? What surprises did you encounter? Did you have anybody on your team who was kind of a naysayer and was having trouble with it? And if so, how did you accomplish that? What did not work as well as you wanted it to work? What was your favorite part of it? When you ask those kinds of details, you can get a sense, did they do it or do they not do it? If they keep answering you in platitudes or generalities, either they're a poor communicator or they didn't really do it. Either way, they may not be outstanding talent for you.
Yeah, either way, they answered your question.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah. They say in hiring, where there is doubt, there is no doubt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
One thing I think you do so well, Alisa, is asking questions and having the right questions. And so actually I want to dive back to, from the perspective of somebody who's a leader, what are some important questions they might ask themselves? And one that I had read, I believe, in an article, or maybe I heard in a podcast from you was, what does the business need from you right now? So,
Yeah.
questions like that, what are some good ones for a leader to be thinking about?
Yeah. I do love that one. What does the business need from you right now helps you take yourself out of, the sort of concerns of your day to day and put you in the role of a shepherd of the business. Another one adjacent to that is if I was going to hire a new leader to replace me, what's the first thing that they would do? I think that is always a helpful one to get out of your own space. And then I love this one, which is, I think, a little bit flowery, but I really love it. What would I do if I weren't afraid? And I think that, again, opens you up to other powers around you. And then I also love, what if we could? Right? So, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. Well, what if we could? Or what if I could? And that, it was back to what we talked about earlier. It kind of helps open up the space of it being playful and safe and free, because you're just brainstorming. Those are some that come to
Powerful.
mind.
Thank you for sharing those. So now let's actually talk about your book, From Startup to Grown Up. So let's start with
Yay!
that. What's it about?
From startup to grown up, right here.
Yeah.
Um, it's about the journey from founder to leader. But really, it's about the journey that all leaders go through as they grow into leaders. Because my thesis is that your journey in leadership is a personal growth journey. And the way to be successful as a leader over the days and months and years of your leadership is to grow, is to adapt, is to change, is to see what the situation calls for and meet that moment. So my book, From Startup to Grown Up, is divided into 3 sections: managing yourself, managing the team, and managing the business. All the areas that you have to grow and grow rapidly alongside to be a great leader for your business.
And so you highlight that the 3 sections of your book are managing yourself, managing the team, and managing the business. Can you share more about why that was structured that way?
Whenever I come into a new environment, I always ask people, so why are we talking? Like, what's important here? And they always give me a challenge. So the challenge is the business is not meeting its goals, right? The sales is not meeting its goals. Or I have a product manager, a product lead who is not doing the job. And I don't know how to articulate that and help him get better or move him aside. Okay, that's fine. So it's always a business problem or a people problem. But when we strip that back and come down to backwards to what's really going on, so why isn't the business meeting its sales goals? Well, maybe we weren't clear in the business goals that we needed to meet. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So, like, why do you think you weren't clear? Well, I tried to get my sales guy to be clear, but he wasn't clear. Oh, so how come you didn't have a difficult conversation with your sales guy, which is like, what's the matter with you? I need clear goals, your sales. Like, oh, I guess I was, and then fill in the blank, afraid, uncertain. I don't know how. I know I need to have direct conversations, but I don't know how to do it. I was too busy distracting myself with the things that I thought were more important, so I couldn't, address it. It always comes back to you. And so that's where I wanted to start. Your self-awareness, your understanding of your own makeup, your own triggers, your own natural swings, your own things that you tend to shy away from. All of those are what make up the basis of your leadership. And then you have to adapt and grow. If you're somebody who's constantly telling everybody all the things that you're thinking, and again, as I said before, like your suggestions or orders, people are going to be very confused. They're going to be running around doing the things they think you want them to do. If you're keeping all your cards close to your chest and not communicating, then people aren't going to know how to follow you. And they're going to be confused because you're not speaking enough. So figuring out what your natural swing is and then correcting and adapting as you need to is kind of the firmament and the foundation of your leadership. And then who are you managing? Well, you're managing all those people around you, right? So you got to figure out when to give feedback, when to hold accountable, how to hold accountable without making them feel bad, when to encourage them, even when they are screwing up, which is a thing that leaders have to do. how to think about when to coach somebody and when to fire somebody. When you have to think about all those things together, that's how you have to grow as a leader, because your playbook from last month doesn't work necessarily for this month. And then finally, why are you going to all this trouble? Because you're building a business, because you're trying to get results, because you're trying to bring value and drive forward a mission of either your company or your division or your little group, one way or the other. So you're applying all this management of yourself and other people in service of a result. And that's the business.
Thank you for covering that. Highly recommend anyone thinking about growing their leadership, their teams, their businesses to check that out. Let's also talk about your podcast. You have a podcast under the same name, From Startup to Grown Up. Tell us more about the premise of that show.
Sure. So in my book, From Startup to Grown Up, I interviewed 14 leaders about their journeys from startup to grown up, growing as a leader. And I loved it. Those were great conversations. It was my favorite part of writing the book. And then they were over. And I thought, oh, what a shame. They're over. And I thought, wait a minute, Eureka. Podcasting is a thing. I could keep having these discussions. So I invented podcasting. I know that's what I'm going to do. And so I started my podcast, and then it was like a question of like, what am I going to call my podcast? And then I realized I had a great title, From Startup to Grown Up. And so that's how I started my podcast. And it's been a joy to talk to people, not just founders, but other people who are solopreneurs, who are just leaders, board directors, about their personal journeys, growing as a leader, as a human being, their career transition moments, and all the things it takes to be successful as a professional and as a leader.
That's awesome. Yeah, highly recommend people check that out as well. I'm sure there's a ton of interesting content on there. Next, I want to move on to scripts. So you're really known to be great at having either difficult or delicate conversations. And so first question I have around that is, what's the formula to even approach a difficult or delicate conversation?
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. What a great question. I mean, I could talk about scripts all day and also addressing and approaching difficult and delicate conversations. So in my book, I have 11 scripts in the back of my book to help you have a difficult conversation or a delicate conversation. They cover all the topics that are important, but they all start with the same thing, which is number one, you, and getting clear for yourself what's going on inside of you, why you're concerned, why it's hard for you, what you want to say, and then definitely move into what is your goal. Because I think people are uncomfortable having difficult conversations because there's like this uneasy feeling of the other person's going to feel bad. And then if you're frustrated, you're actually going to kind of unload on this person, and you know it's not what you should be doing. So you've got to like punish this person. You're going to vent to this person, about the situation. None of that is your goal. Your goal is always to enlighten, as in maybe you didn't know this was a problem, and therefore to educate, and then also to change behavior, always to make a behavior change, to do something with purpose. And then I would add, for most conversations, also to inspire, because you can even have a difficult accountability conversation and leave that person feeling motivated and inspired. And as a leader, you often have to be able to do that.
And so can we talk about an example of when we need to hold somebody accountable, or maybe it's a discussion around improving their performance? What's a way you would go about that?
Yeah, I just talked about this yesterday with somebody, which is, first of all, what's the goal of the conversation? So once we get over that, I'm so frustrated by this person, and I understand, but what's really the goal, right? The goal is to make them better. I believe that, and if, by the way, if you're not going to make them better, and they're not doing a good job, then actually your goal is to fire them. Okay. But let's assume that you want to give them feedback and make them better. So I was talking to one of the leaders I work with, and he was talking about his employee, and just to lay the scene, she's actually great. She means well, she's trying hard, she's building skills, but she has this problem that when she communicates, it all kind of tumbles out of her with no rhyme or reason, with a lot of emotion. And it's a problem because it's hard to understand her, and it's definitely hard to sort of sift through what she's saying. So, first of all, it's helpful to remind yourself of that goal. Like, I want to enlighten her, and I want to also help her get better, and I want to leave her feeling motivated and inspired. So the way to think about that is you first build a relationship with somebody so that they listen to you as an ally. So what that means is you spend time giving them the positive feedback, pointing out what's working, and caring about them as a person, and sending I care about you messages. So I care about you messages are, how was your weekend? Or, hey, is everything okay? I noticed you're a little down today. Or having a little joke with somebody, sending a little funny text or whatever. All of that is I care about you. You're a part of my work life. Positive feedback is you're a keen observer. I loved how you handled that in the meeting. You organized all this so well. I didn't have to do anything but just show up. That's amazing. You're so innovative when we bring ideas to the table. I feel like you're very creative in how you solve them. That is not necessarily in the difficult accountability discussion you're having with somebody. That is before the accountability discussion. That is before the difficult conversation. So you've built up a reservoir of goodwill with this person. So now you're sitting down with a person and you want to give them this feedback and correct them. And you built up the reservoir of goodwill. And then you can sit down and you can say, hey, Stacy, I want to talk to you about this thing. I've noticed that when you bring up a topic, I can tell it's an important topic, but the way you communicate it at times feels a little jumbled and unstructured, and you bring a lot of emotion with it. And so then the problem is it's hard to sort out what's important. And it's also just hard to understand and sift through all the things you're talking about. So first of all, do you see that is the way you communicate? No, I have no idea that's the way I communicate. Oh, let's talk about that. Or, yeah, I know it's a problem. I'll do better. I'm so sorry. People feel guilty and they want to apologize. No. It's not about being sorry. What I need to know from you is how I can be helpful to you. What will help you be a little more structured in the way you think about something and help you be actually less emotional in the way you present it? And so the two of them brainstorm. I encourage them to brainstorm together. And the answer in this case was write down your thoughts in a little journal before you share them. And that helps take some of the weight away from them. So you're not so emotional, and also helps you sort them out, by themselves. So this person has started doing this, even, very quickly reacted on this, and has already seen a result from this situation. And that is the way to give somebody feedback in a very compassionate way, in a direct way, built on a relationship of trust that you've already developed. It's like an A+ situation.
Yeah. Very well said there. In terms of compassion and direct, I going back to the beginning of what you mentioned there, building up that reservoir of goodwill, because I feel like if that's not there, whatever you're saying may not even be heard, right?
Right.
And so I think that's so important to have that existing relationship.
And that's how the feedback sandwich, they call it, or whatever they call it, that come into play. It's like, say something good, tell them what you really want to tell them, and then say something good, right? So it's like, oh, Michael, I like how you started this whole podcast. Oh, there's a problem with, the way you've articulated yourself. Oh, nice shirt. Right? It kind of makes no sense. Right? It's so superficial and specious. So, but the meaning is there. And the thing is, if you haven't built up that relationship, then the way to go into that is, listen, Stacy, first of all, I don't tell you this enough. I think you're amazing. And I think that the way you show up in these kinds of meetings is really great. And the way you organize yourself is fantastic. I think it'd be even better if there was this one thing that you could work on. And I'm going to ask you, is this a good time for us to talk about it? So that's the way to get into it with the so-called feedback sandwich style. But your intention is not to be like, every time I say something bad to you, I'm going to say something good, then something bad, then something good. It's more like, I want to showcase right now that I'm an ally to you. And that way that somebody can calm down enough to hear it. Basically, I always phrase this as like, I'm wasting my breath about this to you because I see greatness in you. And if I didn't see greatness in you, I wouldn't bring it up.
Love that. All right. Next, Alisa, I want to talk about building your personal brand. So you've done a great job being on a ton of different media outlets, podcasts. Obviously, you have your book. How does someone think about building their personal brand?
Yeah. First of all, people are very often allergic to brand building. Oh, I shouldn't have to build my brand. My work should speak for itself. Let me tell you something. Your work does not speak for itself. If nobody knows about your work, then by definition, your work does not speak for itself. So you've got to do the work of building your platform and your brand. Otherwise, you have wonderful ideas to share and they will not get out. And I know myself, I feel like I have a lot to say and I want to have a voice. And so it took me a while to come to terms with the fact that people weren't just going to naturally flock to me. So step one, recognize you have to build a brand. And then step two, look around you at all the channels. We have so many channels these days, being on podcasts, being on social media, writing articles, and then pick one or two channels and do those consistently, day in, day out. And then once you've mastered those, you can add on other ones, but don't do everything. Do one or two things. So for me, I at first I wanted to write for publications, and you don't just like walk over to Forbes and say, "Oh, would you take me on as a writer?" Or you don't just say to HBR, "Hey, publish me, please." Right? I wish it worked that way, but it doesn't. So I first wrote a newsletter for a number of years, and I had a newsletter, and then I would try to get connected to a Forbes editor, and it wouldn't work. And then one day I was at a dinner with the publisher of Worth, and I plucked up my courage and I said, I know that you are focused on having more women contributors. I think I'd be a great contributor on leadership. Would you consider bringing me on? He said yes, which was great. I followed up with him. Nothing, got nothing back. I followed up with him again. He sent me to his, whoever it was, the associate editor of something. I followed up with her, nothing back. Followed up with her again, nothing back. Followed up with her again. She got back to me and I started writing for Worth. And so I say that because that's what it takes, right? It's sort of plucking up the courage to ask the question, to ask for things like that, following up, people don't get back to you and not taking it personally. And that is how I then was able to leverage my way into writing for Forbes. And then the Inc. people found out that I wrote for Forbes and wanted me to write for them. And then I began to pitch articles to HBR. And, that's how you build it up. But it was a lot of like, along the way, being proactive myself, and then also doing the work. Writing articles is not easy, and it takes practice. So I had to practice and be willing to not be good and have it take a long time. And then I got better at it. And, you have to just keep trying. And I would just say that, like, you've got to pick the channel and then keep trying, knowing that it's going to help, knowing that it's also going to amount to something, but it's not going to amount to something on the first day. So it's a big investment.
Right. And I think starting with selecting the right channel for you, right? Whether you want to write, you want to be on audio, you want to be on video, and then determining what is the right channel for you. And like what you said, just going deep on that and having the persistence to keep pursuing the right contacts and opportunities to be able to kind of have your own break, and also having it compound, knowing that it's going to take years, right? It could take a decade plus just to have all of that compound. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And so, Alisa, you probably get a ton of different opportunities at this point. And so I'm curious, how do you decide what to say yes or no to, or what to put your focus on?
Yeah. Not so simple for me, actually. I want to put my focus on everything. So then it's like, I bite off two more than I can chew. So first of all, I work with a lot of clients. And so obviously, working with clients, my client service comes first. And I'm always available to my clients. And, I got into coaching because I wanted to make a difference. And that has never changed. At heart, I'm a coach. The second thing is that I'm continuing to expand my reach. So I'm looking for things which expand my reach so that my ideas get out there and I'm able to have the impact that I want to have. And the third thing is that, does it seem fun? And, I've definitely earned the right now in my career with my flexibility and what I get to do is I get to do things for fun. So like I get invited now to go to Dublin Tech Summit and Web Summit in Portugal and other places like that, or speak at South by Southwest. And so that both extends my platform and gives me, more reach, but also it's like fun for me. It's not fun for everybody, but it's fun for me. So that's a good, like way to be able to do a couple of things at once.
Yeah, I like that structure. And next is when it comes to weight training. So you had mentioned that you're very into weight training. I think this is something you're passionate about and the impact it might have on your physical, mental health. Can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with weight training. I'm so passionate about weight training. So just to say, I came to weight training, I grew up out of shape and overweight. And as I grew up and grew into a young adult, I began to get more educated about healthy eating. I was able to sort of handle my eating. I became a runner and became more physical and a cyclist. And then, best thing that ever happened to me, but the worst thing that ever happened to me, I developed osteoarthritis in my right knee. So I was like, my running career is over. And I cried in the cab on the way home from this diagnosis. And yet I met another doctor and she said, well, not so fast. If you get really strong, um, then maybe you'll be able to run. And so I
Hmm.
said, I'll do whatever it takes. And I hated weight training, but I hired a trainer and I spent a year fighting with him because I was kind of anxious and I hated it. And then I got like more into it and I began to feel how it was dealing with my body. And I loved being strong because as a woman, you always are constantly being told to be smaller, 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 thinner, thinner, thinner. And now it's like I had something else to be. I could be stronger and I could lift more weight. And it was very, very satisfying. And then as the years have gone on, I've become very skilled in weightlifting. And, the pandemic kind of interrupted it, but I still was working out at home with my kettlebells at home
Hmm.
with my trainer on Zoom. And I've just now, my boyfriend and I have built out like a really small home gym in the basement here. And now I'm back to barbell training. And there's something extremely satisfying about lifting heavy weight, about getting stronger, about progressing, about failing. I just did a bench press this morning and I did, let's do 5 sets of 8. And I did 4 sets of 8 and 1 set of 7. And I failed on that last one. And there's something powerful about failing and trying again and watching yourself get stronger and how it makes you feel. And it's definitely consistent for everybody with like, how do you get over your obstacles and fears? Because weightlifting is kind of scary when you're lifting heavy weight. And how do you get over the discomfort? Weight training, all exercise is actually very uncomfortable. And how do you get over that in order to reach a new height in some way? I think there's a lot of carryover to professional life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what's interesting about exercise is you could see that physical progress, especially with weightlifting. I mean, it's very quantitative. You can see, okay, I am increasing in weight, builds the confidence, and it's like a game. There's a game aspect to it. And I used to
Totally.
run quite a bit as well, doing half marathons, things like that. And one of the favorite things I loved about running was just the mental conversation you got to have with yourself as you're pushing through different mileage or different paces. And so, yeah, I've seen that carry over to my career as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Mental conversation is a good way to put it.
Yeah. Last thing I would like to cover here is I think people want to know about investing in Broadway shows. I think that's very unique. Not a lot of people are doing that. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. Well, I do it with a friend and a business partner, and we decided a few years ago that like it'd be fun and interesting to invest in Broadway shows. I think for me, it was so exciting to be part of the Broadway community. Having moved to New York, and Broadway and theater and culture is such an important part of the fabric of New York. I wanted to be part of that in a different way. So we did what we always do, which was we networked to sort of say, how do you even do this? Like, who can people who can mentor us? We met with a ton of producers and assistant producers and people in the biz. And we began to get our ideas together of how to do this. We met a bunch of people who would send us deals. So you would see videos or workshops, and we'd say, like, oh, this isn't very good. This isn't very good. And then we saw actually our first musical that we saw, which was great, was a video of Tootsie the musical.
Hmm.
And I just knew when I saw it, I sent it to my friend. I was like, this is the one I think we should invest in. And then you have to learn how to read a budget. So I'm a CPA. I know how to read a budget, but this is the Broadway budget. It's kind of different. And then also, how do you know it's accurate? They have these estimates for, costumes and set and the actors. Well, okay, how do you know all that's accurate? Like, do you trust the person putting it together? Then they also give you an estimate for how much they'll be able to get in terms of revenue and what will be the payback period. Okay, well, that's fine. But when they overestimate the revenue, like everyone's going to pay full price for these tickets, you begin to learn actually most tickets are sold at a discount. So,
Hmm.
how can you put in that? How can you do the analysis yourself? And then we created our decision rules about how we were going to decide to invest. So, the decision rules were number one, we wanted it to be commercially viable. And number two, we wanted to be proud to be associated with it. And
Hmm.
everything else we could kind of deal with. And we sort of tried, and we've done well, and we certainly have had some misses and some hits, but Tootsie the Musical won about 2 Tonys, and actually The Inheritance, another show we're very proud to be a part of, won multiple Tonys, including for best show. And so we've enjoyed it. And I guess the last thing I would say is that we've met an entirely new network of people in New York. So we started from
Right.
zero. And a year and a half later, starting from zero, we invited 12 producers to brunch in December of that year. And it was like, we were both looking around the room like, wow, we just got 12. Like, we didn't know these people a year and a half ago. And here we all are having brunch together.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about investing. It's not only, the financial gain possibility, but also the network that you get from doing that. So yeah, that's super
And you learn
interesting.
new things. Yeah, it's really fun.
Absolutely. Well, Alisa, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing such a wide range of knowledge. I learned a ton. Thank you so much. I know our audience is going to love this.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It was really fun.